First of all, we're gonna go ahead and jump in. This, if you want to make sure you're in the right room, Unidos por Venezuela. We are going to be talking about the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela and some of what you've been hearing in the news recently. To let you know a little bit about myself, and then we'll go ahead and introduce our panelists or conversation participants. I don't like the word panelists. But my name is AnaYelsi Velasco-Sanchez. I live in Washington, D.C. I was born in Caracas, Venezuela. I've been in the U.S. for most of my life. So I've been here for 31 years. I'm 34. And I am a public educator, writer, artist and consultant, and I do a lot of work on racial justice and decolonization and LGBTQ inclusion. So that's a little bit of my background. And the reason I wanted to make sure that we had this conversation and that we recorded this conversation so that folks can access it in the future is there are, rightfully so, a lot of questions and a lot of confusion about what is going on in Venezuela right now. What is difficult for those of us who are Venezuelan is the one-on-one conversations, the having to answer the same questions repeatedly. There's emotional and intellectual that's taxing in multiple regards. And so we thought this would be something that we can point to when people have questions, and we'll hopefully answer a few of them. We might not be able to get to everything, but some clarity. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce our panelists, or allow them to introduce themselves. Gabi, since you're the person I'm seeing in the box right next to me, do you mind introducing yourself first?
Of course. Hi, my name is Gabriela Garcia Greco. Please call me Gabi. I use she, they pronouns. I live in Seattle, Washington, where it's snowing a lot right now. I'm from Caracas, and I also lived in Maracaibo and Puerto La Cruz. And I've been in the US for 10 years.
Thank you. And Manuel.
Hi everybody, my name is Manuel Gago. I'm from Aragua de Barcelona. That's near Puerto La Cruz, by the way. I'm living Caracas, Maracaibo, Barquisimeto. So I moved to the US almost 6 years ago. In Florida now. I live in Richmond, Virginia. I am a journalist, activist, organizer. I am the Venezuela country specialist for Amnesty International USA.
Thank you. And Fa.
So my name is Fabiola Rondon Delgado. I go by Fa. I am a lawyer. I'm a human rights attorney. I'm from Maracaibo originally, lived in Valencia, and I lived in Washington, D.C. for about 7 years. Besides being a lawyer, after moving here, I decided to take more of an art administration side of the career, and I work at the Hirshhorn Museum, and I'm a program specialist at the Hirshhorn Museum.
Thank you. So I thought we could sort of zoom out a little bit before we get into what people are hearing in the news right now. I think what has been difficult when talking about Venezuela is folks don't realize the complexity and the breadth of history for Venezuela and for the Venezuelan government up to this point. And I really think that's impacting how they're understanding what's happening right now. And so I wanted to jump in first and just give a little bit of background, kind of an intellectual history of what's happened up to this point, and particularly 2 questions: who are the players that we're talking about? Who are the people up to this point and the current players on the scene, and how did they come into power? What that's looked like. So I thought if we can first kind of jump into who are the players. Gabi, I'm going to field that question to you. Do you mind starting us off?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, of course, I'm not a historian or anything. This is something that I've learned through just my life, like most people. I think the thing is, knowing about a lot of Venezuelan history is complicated because it's a long period of time and there's a lot that has happened, but there's also, you have to incorporate the history of the entire region to understand the better context and what things mean the way they have happened. In a coup that happened the year I was born, the month I was born, it was the attempted coup that Chavez did, where when he was captured, he was imprisoned. Later he was granted an amnesty, and then he began his political campaign to be president, and he was selected in 1999, started in 2000. By then I was like 8, 9, 10. But I started learning and hearing a lot of like Marta Colomina and Pedro Pensini, who were by then really important journalists in the radio, talking about all the different points, right? And eventually learn more that Chavez comes from a tradition of revolucionarios in Latin America, right? That goes back to the 60s and even earlier. And so the fact that, yes, it all started, you could say, in the 90s, you could say starting 2002 with the attempted coup, you could say starting 2012, but I think it started even earlier. And so to me, some of the players include, because of that reason, include a lot of folks in the region. It includes the United States, of course, that has been a very big influence in Latin America. It includes Cuba, which also has had a huge influence in Venezuela for many years, before even Chavez came into the picture. It includes other big powers in the world, like China and Russia, which people often don't mention in this conversation, but I think are key in understanding kind of what's going on, as long with some groups that are not countries, but they're groups like Hezbollah, like Las FARC, like other narco-trafficking organizations that are very important players in everything that's happening, but that also don't get named often. So I think hay muchas manos en la sopa. There's definitely a lot of different people involved here, and that's why the conversation is so complicated. And of course, there's like the people from la oposición and kind of what they have been doing through all this time. So that's like a very short, condensed overview of who I think are some of the most important folks in what's going on right now.
I was going to say Chavez won in 98 and started in 99.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to add anything to who are some of the players people should be aware of, or what have influenced things getting up to this point, Fa?
That was a pretty great list. I was like, oh, Hezbollah, I forgot about them too. Something that people, in Venezuela, not everybody has the access to information, is that Venezuela for years, especially when Chavez started, they started making alliances with Russia and Cuba, obviously Cuba, Russia and China, and then training terrorist groups like the FARC from Colombia, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia. They started training in Venezuela. Same with Hezbollah. After the FARC in Colombia, so Colombia, we need to like mention them too. Colombia is also like, they're our cousins, they're brothers. After the FARC were, in conversations with the Colombian government a few years back to like make a peace treaty, we as Venezuela government has actually traded the FARC by the ELN. So a new terrorist group, also Colombian, because the FARC are not dealing with them as much. Yes, so some terrorist groups and some countries as well.
Yeah, I think like when Chavez came to power, the difference is that like the becoming like the boom of the oil prices. Venezuela have so much money, so it start like align with the no aligned countries and start doing. Actually, Chavez was the first president to visit Saddam Hussein after the Gulf War. I was the last one. Gaddafi go to Venezuela. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad from Iran. North Korea opened an embassy in Caracas. We have ties with Belarus, now Turkey. So all these countries like an online, they start like a movement, like, well, the third war now is against the Occident, but to the West. But that was like a movement financed by Venezuela, because we have like a lot of money when the oil was like $160 per barrel. So we were like a new rich kids in the block.
I think one of the like not trigger words, but one of the buzzwords that keeps getting thrown out even right now is oil. And it's the reason that people can't let go of certain narratives about the relationship between America and Venezuela is because of this, the oil. So would, for those who are able to speak a little bit more to how you've understood America's relationship with Venezuela up to this point, and maybe what are some of the myths that you've heard repeated, and what are the things that you understand to be true that you want people to understand about not even what America is saying about what's occurring right now, but up to this point, what has the relationship been between these two countries?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. Yeah, when people say that America just wants Venezuela's oil, well, America and everybody really wants oil, period. China and Russia want it too. But they don't pay for it. America is one of the countries that does pay for oil and has done it for the entire history. So when Venezuela, like back in the 50s, 40s, like the big boom of oil, with El Mene Grande, people, Venezuelans didn't know what that was. Like, what is this black thing that is emanating from earth? And my grandfather has a picture of it. Like, he used to live in a camp, and that thing happened. We didn't know what it was. So who knew what it was? Americans, Germans, Dutch, people in Europe, and the Americans as well, who eventually came to the country, and they created all of these oil camps. And they weren't just to like extract, but they created refineries, they created all of these structure and trained Venezuelans. Of course, they brought other people, but they had to train Venezuelans who eventually took over. And throughout the history, there's always been like a concession kind of system, or like, okay, well, we own it. Now that we're trained, we know that we're just not going to let you take it. And who was the president? But like in 71, I want to say, we nationalized the industry. It belongs to Venezuela from Mene Grande to, it was what, Meneven, Campo. Like there were different names until it became PDVSA, Petroleums of Venezuela, what we know now. When Chavez came in power, the oil industry was already nationalized. So when people said like, oh, but he took oil back, like, no, he just kicked some people out, mostly Venezuelans, but the oil industry was already nationalized, and we were giving concessions to Americans and to other companies as well to give them the right of them to come do some work and take a fee. But they were paying taxes. Everything was like, it's always been nationalized in my life, in our lifetime. So that's one of the myths. Chavez did not nationalize.
Yeah, actually, it was in '76. The nationalization of Chavez was like not true at the end, because most of the Orinoco belt, there's like a different type of oil. It's extra heavy.
Extra heavy, yeah.
That was like concession for the Venezuela government in 2007 or 8. Was Chevron, was Shell, was Petrobras, was Lukoil from Russia, was China, like a 50% was China. So at the end, it's the same. So I don't see like any different before the 76, like it was actually nationalized by Carlos Andrés Perez. So I think it was a misconception that people say Chavez nationalized the oil, give the oil to the people. Nothing is bad.
So we get to this point where Venezuela is recognized on a national scene for this discovery of oil. There are relationships with multiple countries and companies as a result of this surplus and oil. And then you get to, there's this expectation, I think, for people that with oil comes money. So I'm not sure who might want to speak to this first, but where do we get to the point from being rich in oil to, because this is pre-Maduro, being a country that is losing its resources, is losing access to services, where poverty is increasing as opposed to prosperity, despite being seen as this richness in oil. Can anyone speak to kind of how is that happening at the same time, and maybe what led to that?
Let's take it.
You look ready, Fa. Take it.
Yes. So similar idea. Concessions always existed. We got taxes. People came because they have the right. When in 2002, Chavez had already been elected. He was elected in 98. Started his presidency in 99. By 2002, people were already, like the population were already panicking, especially company owners, factory owners, farmers, business owners, because he started a series of unhinged and I'm going to use quotations because it's legally not that was not the process, but expropriations. And that just, it became a meme, basically. There's literally a meme of expropiese. Expropriate. Chavez just became very power hungry and started quite literally sending the National Guards or his paramilitary goons to take farms, factories, companies, businesses, big and small, started with the big ones, to give them to the people, to like create this socialist dream that was not really socialism, in that because it didn't follow the procedures of an expropriation, nobody got paid, nobody was giving, an allowance and a stipend, or even help to like transition some people to their homes. Farmers, they live in their houses or they live in their farms, they lost their homes, they lost everything. So when that happened, that biggest expropriation, I guess, was when PDVSA in 2002, when people are starting to realize, wow, this guy may not be that great. PDVSA, biggest company in the country, and the oil company went on strike for over a month. And that was, it was December, I remember, because it was awful. Nobody got Christmas presents and there was no gasoline. Everybody went on strike. And so we had a referendum, we had a recall referendum. And because Chavez did not oblige, and he changed the law in a manner that it made people vote either yes, we want you to stay, or no, when that's not legal. If you have a recall referendum, you say, yes, we want you to stay. If you don't have enough votes as the same that got you there in the first place, you're recalled. We call for new elections, you're not the president because you don't have the same people that backed you in before. But now with this yes and no option, what he did was, oh, you voted for me, yes. All the people who voted no, you don't want me, I want the list. That is a list that exists. There's even a software, it's called La Lista de Tascón, and you can go online if you work for the government and you can see who voted against the president. And that was the first time there was a massive, not layout, a massive firing. Over 20,000 people got fired from PDVSA because they were on strike. And, I'm like, long story short, now Chavez put in the new director of PDVSA is my buddy, my cousin, my co-criminal from back in 92 when we did this coup. So everyone taking over these farms and factories and companies and the oil industry, they're not prepared. They're not engineers. And almost 93% of them have a criminal record. And not because of protesting, but because of bank robbery. Check Celia Flores, check all these people. They're all like bank robbers, terrorists, assassins, homicidas, murderers. It's not, they're not even.
I think there's a point that you named, and just to jump back a little bit, in terms of what people in the US have been hearing, and have been hearing for years, even before the current events, is that there's a swell of support from those who would be considered left-leaning or liberal in the US, and the reason for Chavez. And the reason for that is he's held up as this beacon of hope for what it looks like to redistribute wealth and redistribute resources. And so so there's this understanding from a distance that the only people who don't like Chavez are the ones who are rich and awful to begin with, and don't want the people to prosper, and want to uphold a very severe class system. And what would you say to that understanding of what was happening?
I think, let me take the lead over there. So always so I travel, I have a lot of, I myself consider a progressive people. When you talk with other folks around the world, Chavez was good, was progressive, and I asked, so the education was free, the college was free before Chavez, the health system, public health system was before Chavez. Yeah, he bring Cuban doctors that the government paid $10,000 a month, and they were almost enslaved. That's why 80% of the Cuban doctors go go to the U.S. or Colombia, running from Venezuela because someone was a slave. After the Constitution, the '99 Constitution was like, wow, this is a very progressive stuff. There was a very good law about violence against women law, but nobody get in place. But no discrimination of abortion, no same-sex marriage. Actually, the government and the government officials against all the gay, actually refer like all the arrivals as gay, like when Capriles, they call him Capriloca, they get their own wife, they start spreading rumors about
National
gay
TV.
parties. Yeah, and national TV. That was a national TV. Actually, sometimes it wasn't like a TV, like a broadcast Chavez broadcasting all TV, mandatory TV broadcasting, say stuff like that, like calling marica at the opponent. So that's a progressive. I don't think so. This is a progressive government. Yeah, what happened? The rhetoric Chavez had good charisma. Went to the UN and called George Bush a donkey and a drunk. Gets my legs suffer. But just still making business with the US. They was criticizing that the US invaded Iraq, but the Venezuelan fuel was used to fuel the jets and to send the bombs to Iraq. So at the end, so you are making business with the devil, no?
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that,
I wanted to add to that.
yeah, I think there's so many things. It's like, I think an important thing is that Chavez, like you mentioned, was incredibly charismatic. And he said exactly what he knew people wanted to hear, both in Venezuela and abroad. I think he fit really well with the left-leaning, progressive rhetoric of el pueblo, la revolución, la gente, we're gonna give them the things that they deserve that they never had. And, you know, I think, obviously there was corruption there before him and not all the things worked as they should have. And I think he's tapped on the part of Venezuela that they were people that needed stuff, that needed basic water, that needed electricity, people that were hoping for a change, and that believed him because we wanted that. I think at least some part of people did, and then what happened is that he had this great narrative, but he didn't back it up with real things that actually worked. He didn't have the integrity to carry it through. He didn't have the intentions, I think, of carrying it through. Like he would build houses for Misión Vivienda that in parts that were inaccessible, that didn't have access to public transportation, houses that would fall apart. When El Desastre de Valencia happened, which was this big avalanche that happened near Caracas, people 7 years later still didn't have a home. When he had promised on national TV that within the year, he would have that fixed. And so I think part of the thing is like this romanticized idea of the revolutionary, you know, that started with Castro and all these people that people love. And I get it, it would have been so great, you know. It's such a great idea, but that's not the reality. And I think it's hard for people to understand that in a lot of senses, Chavez and his group betrayed this hope that people put in him, this trust that people put in him. And that betrayal is painful. Because, you know, I used to think that, oh man, this guy is so stupid, he can do anything right. But then I grew up and I realized it's not that he's stupid, that for me, in my opinion, is that he was cruel. Because he had the means, he was very smart, but he just didn't have the integrity. And he didn't put, what's the expression, like, the thing where his words were.
Money where his mouth is.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. He didn't do that. He did that, like, en a facade con el Ministerio de la Mujer, de la participación protagónica de la mujer, con el Ministerio de Asuntos Indígenas. We have like an entire like department dedicated to indigenous people issues, while indigenous people are being murdered by illegal mining and their environment is being destroyed. They're suffering from malaria and dengue and diseases that had been eradicated or controlled at the very least. And that the people, the poor, brown people that are supposed to be at the forefront of this are the people that are suffering the worst, I think. And so that's, to me, the hardest part of, like, I hear why people want to believe it, and I feel that, but it's important that we look at it for what it is, because it's urgent. It's like, imminent that we need to solve this situation now. And so I think that's how like Chavez's rhetoric pulled a lot of things, how he shaped this relationship with the US. He was like, oh no, George Bush, he's a devil. But Venezuela never stopped selling oil to the US.
Yeah.
So it's all a bunch of blah, blah, blah. Well, when you look at the facts, it's a whole different story.
So you have all of this occurring with Chavez, and then you have Maduro come into power. And if we can take just a couple of minutes to kind of talk about one, how he came into his presidency and the parallels between his and Chavez's. So people another thing that you hear a lot here in the US is that it's just like part two of Chavez. It's just, you know, like the same banner, the same politics under a new leader. So one, if you can speak to how he came into power quickly, and just whether you see it that way. Was this just more of the same? So I'm going to pass that to Fa first.
Sure. Oh boy. Maduro came to power in a very tumultuous way because for months, and I have to say this, Chavez was the president. He was elected the first time. Many elections were a sham, were a fraud. Even Smartmatic, the company that does the whole electronic voting thing, has said, hey, we don't trust what you guys are doing. Like, you're committing fraud with our machines. So just saying that. Chavez became ill. And for many months, he was in the public eye. I remember I was already in America, and all my family is back home, by the way. And I remember just like, nobody knows where he is. Everybody thinks he's dead, and that people are trying to like cover for it. Where is he? Where is he? Where is he? And then he was sent to Cuba because eventually he declared he had cancer. So he went to Cuba to get treatment. He's not going to get treatment in Venezuela with all the amazing doctors that we have. It's like, oh, you went to, okay, so our medical system doesn't work for the person. He needs to be sent somewhere else. And months went by without the population really knowing where Chavez was. So like, I really need to say that because for months we didn't have a president really. That's just mine. I was like, I thought he was dead. And they were trying to like find a way to make sure that they stayed in power. Maduro came after Chavez died as some sort of successor. He was appointed by the National Assembly because Chavez died in like the last 2 years of...
The first 2 years.
The first 2 years, yeah, the first 4 years of his new mandate, which, by the way, used to be 4 years, and then when Chavez got in power, he extended it to 6. So now we don't have a president every 4 years, every 6 years.
And unlimited elections.
And unlimited elections, unlimited re-elections.
Re-elections.
He always kept winning and winning and winning. And so, yeah, Maduro started, he got re-elected also, that I think it was this past election in May of 2018, when there's a new election, but it is out of time. It is because let's see, oh my gosh, it was like everything I say was like, it has a backstory. 2018 was the last time that the opposition got really, really organized. And for the first time in almost 18 years, right now by 20, we see a unified opposition that wins for the first time the National Assembly, which is our Congress. After Congress is elected, within all those people, Guaido, like all these different opposition leaders, and nobody's like some people just happen to be there. Maduro says, okay, no, this Congress doesn't exist anymore. And he dissolves it, which he doesn't have the authority to do. Only Congress can give him such power, and obviously Congress is not giving him that power. But he robs this power, says this assembly doesn't work anymore, doesn't exist, and he creates a second parallel Congress with hand-picked Congress people that he chose. Most of them are family of his wife, by the way. I think for the last 3 years, the Congress has been called the Garden, El Jardín, because está lleno de flores. Celia Flores is the president's wife, and flores means flowers. So Congress, I think at one point, 58 Congress people were all directly related to Celia Flores. So the Garden. Where was I?
No, I think it's like that. So 2015 was the National Assembly election. Opposition get the power. Yeah, Maduro decided to dissolve, and the old Congress still in power. They appoint like 20 more judges to the the Tribunal Supremo de Justicia, like Supreme Court. That when this new assembly get in power, say no, right now they don't recognize Maduro, we don't recognize you, so that's why Maduro asked, yeah, we have a new national constituent assembly. So this is nobody in the opposition participate in that election, and that was like all Chavistas or now Maduristas say get this national constituent assembly. So we are two. So when Maduro, the election of the 2018 was this constituent assembly that was illegitimate, unconstitutional, called to this presidential election out of time because the election need to be on December 2018. So what happened in this election? The opposition doesn't participate. The only two people that participate in this election was Henry Falcon, that was part of the actually he participated in the coup d'etat in '92. He was a Chavez supporter, and the other is like a evangelical pastor. They have very close business relationship with the government. Actually, he appears in the Panama Papers with a company that import medical supplies for millions and millions of dollars with the Venezuelan government. So that's the only two candidates that participate in this, plus Maduro. So nobody in the opposition vote. Was only like maybe 25-30% of the people voted that election. So nobody recognized. The international committee don't recognize that election. The opposition and most of the people don't recognize the election. So that's why what happened in January is like, according to all these constitutionalist people, is like that election was illegal. That means you ends your mandate on January 9, 2019. January 10 is another president, and it's like no election, nobody do election, it's no president. So it's no president, it's no vice president. So the third in line is the president of the National Assembly. And who is the president of the National Assembly?
Juan Guaido.
So far, it's like the story we have right now.
So this takes me to my next question. With all of this talk of kind of kabuki theater versions of elections where it's not above board. So here is the question that I know some of you have been hearing. I have definitely been hearing. Does Venezuela have two presidents right now?
No.
Who is the president of Venezuela, and should they be? Was it a coup? Is there a coup happening right now? Gabi, I'm gonna go to you and then to Fa.
Well, I think Manuel explained it very well. We have one president. His name is Juan Guaido. He's not our permanent president. He's an interim, ideally an interim president that can carry us into democratic elections where people can actually vote and there's no fraud. It was not a coup because we're actually following the law. So the Article 233 of our Constitution, which has been named a lot, that came into play by the process that Manuel just explained. And I know that people keep saying, oh, this was a US-backed coup, this is like US intervention. And I'm like, yeah, I hear you that the US has an infamous history of messing with Latin America, because they have. And they probably have a big interest in us right now. Like all these other people that we already mentioned, China, Cuba, all this terrorist group, you know. But this, in Venezuela, the thing that is happening is not something that the US happening, something that is in our constitution. And we're just trying to follow the law. For once.
Thank you. Fa, do you want to add to that?
In almost 20 years, we have a Congress that is following the law. The dictator, I'm not going to refer him as president because he isn't anymore, and he wasn't. He was a dictator. All the elections that we've had since, I want to say, at least 2002 have been a fraud. I again, even Smartmatic has said that, but we're following the law. We are following the constitutional procedure. And I mean, he is the president. Again, as you mentioned, Gabi, he's an interim president. And for the first time, we also have a strategy. If you say, ¿verdad? In a room full of Venezuelans, if you say, cesa de usurpación, the second thing that you say is, gobierno de transición, and the third thing you say is, elecciones libres. Like, that is the rule of law. A cease of usurp, which is what Maduro is doing. He's clinging to power by force, not legally. Then after, ceasing that usurped power, we need to have a transitioning government, which is what Guaido would be. He would be the bridge between this illegal power taking over to, finally, the third step, free elections. For the first time, again, free, direct, democratic, secret elections without a lista de Tascon, without a software where people can see who you voted for, and that way you lose benefits. You can get kicked out of your job, like what happened. Like I'm one of those. I didn't even vote in 2002 because I was underage, but I went to get. I applied for an internship at a court, at a criminal court in Valencia, and I remember during my application, in my interview, I was told that I could not even apply because my mom voted against the president. And I was like, but I didn't vote. And also, how do you know? And that was like 4 years ago. So you're telling me, oh yeah, we have a software and you can work here. It's like, what if I hate my mom and I'm super chavista? It's not true, but like, they know it. So yeah.
Right. So why, and you touched on this a little bit, Gabi, why is the US recognizing a new president different than a US-backed, supposedly, coup? And what, on the global scene, how are other countries responding to this? Because I think one of the confusions is that I think there's this perception that this is just this thing occurring between Venezuela and America, where it's America recognizing a new president and the rest of the, is this the US falling in line with the rest of the world who's all recognizing the same, like, democratically elected president or interim president? Does that make sense? I feel like that was a mouthful. Whoever wants to speak to that.
All right. Well, first of all, I think it is a very problematic thing that Americans, I don't want to say all of them, but most Americans feel like this is an American problem. This is not, we're very American-centric. That is very problematic. Venezuela is going through a process, and it does affect the region and the world, but all the countries are, as I said, recognizing a precedent, a legal precedent, not backing a coup. First, everything is legal, so it cannot be a coup. Second of all, I think it's very lame to be pro-Yankee. It's a very anti-gringo sentiment around the world. So, of course, anything that America does is like, no, that's not true, that they can be good, plus Trump, fuck Trump. Blah, blah, blah. I don't believe that everybody is 100% evil. As like I said it for Chavez. Chavez had amazing ideas. Didn't came through. Trump, not a supporter, yes, racist, homophobe, all these things. But what he's doing and his administration is doing is not just like falling in line. And sometimes it feels hypocrite, like, oh, how do you violate human rights here, but you help over there? Same Venezuela. How do you violate human rights here, but you're humanitarian aid to Cuba, who, by the way, are the only interventionist country in here. You can go to any official government office in Venezuela and you will have a Venezuelan flag and a Cuban flag next to it. How is that not intervention? Why is America recognizing something intervention for Cuba being there and having PDVSA Cuba? Like, we have a branch of our Petróleos de Venezuela in Cuba. How is that non-interventionist?
Thank you. I want to pivot a little bit, and I know we could stay on that because there's so much to unpack there, but I want to spend the last bit of our time before we take a couple of questions talking about the people in Venezuela themselves and what daily life looks like right now. What so there's a few different questions going on in my mind, but if we can just for a moment for those that you know that are still back home, what are the stories you're hearing? What is life for Venezuelans right now? The quality of life for Venezuelans right now? Manuel, will you speak to that first for us?
Yeah, I think before that, I can do a resume about right now, like all this is not like the rhetoric now strong against poor Venezuela socialists or Trump, US against Venezuela, Trump against Maduro. No, Venezuela is living a humanitarian crisis. People are dying for lack of food, for lack of medicine, as a humanitarian immigration crisis. Almost 3 million, more than 3 million people left Venezuela to the south in the last 2 years. Actually, people are asking for asylum in the border. People are walking, driving to the border with Mexico to ask asylum for the US. People are walking to Peru, walking to Argentina. People are dying, starving for lack of medicine, for like minimal like antibiotics. That's the crisis they have the right now, and that is like people is asking for help. And this right now, people and the National Assembly say we need humanitarian help. The Venezuelan government for like 2-3 years say it's no humanitarian crisis here. That's BS. That's a media propaganda stuff. This because they want the oil, but people are dying. And like a lot of people, I know a lot of organizations that do like a underrated work, sending money to Venezuela to help people, sending goods to Venezuela was like contraband because the Venezuelan government don't allow medicines, don't allow anything. So people need to pay extra to send goods and help kids that are starving. Actually, right now, today, I received, so talking about the stories, today my sister texted me, hey, I don't want to be like this is like a political stuff, but remember I am a school teacher in a preschool. I have 28 kids. These kids are starving, are dying. So last week I organized with some friends and we cooked for them to 28 kids. Like, you think you can send some money to help me to feed this kid because it's the like they were so happy and like those kids are like fainting every day. I know people here are dying for food. So like that's the crisis. That's the story we saw. And say it's impossible me to do a legal way to send food to these people. So now, well, let me call some friends. So I send a text to some friends, and in a few minutes I have like almost $100. I will send that money, and I will provide food for 28 kids for 1 month. And that's like a lot of people is doing right now. People are sending money like to provide for the entire family. That's what the young people are leaving Venezuela because that's the only way that people survive on their last year was 1.6 million% of inflation, and this year they are calculating about 10 million%. So people over there is earning monthly $6 per month. So who can survive that? So that's the story you hear every day. That's a lot of GoFundMe around. That's why all our friends on Facebook get somebody need like a basic operation for like anything like a appendicitis, anything like that. Like people like dying for infection, like so stupid stuff. And that's what happened right now in Venezuela. That's why the international community is organizing and helping, like not only the US, Canada, the most affected people, Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, Argentina, Paraguay, in Europe. So that's all people like, wow, that's or them, because when some friend like Venezuela always a friend of the war or helping people with any crisis, Venezuela send goods, send people with the earthquake in Mexico, send people to Haiti, send people to whatever. to help, and we have the money. We send money to help people, and that is the time to the international community respond. They ask for the Venezuelan people, and that's why Venezuelan authorities need to like open the borders, not block the border with containers, and let the humanitarian help led by a lot of organizations, Red Cross, Oxfam, ACNUR, another nation commission for refugees. All this, that's the people is asking. Not like that you saw the president asking like they're like mendigos for people want food. Yeah, people is asking for that because they're eating for the garbage. You saw the videos you saw over there. And yes, when you go over there invited by the Venezuelan government, it's like North Korea. You go to North Korea with the North Korea government, you saw everything is perfect. The shelters are full. But get out of the tour of the government and saw the reality. That's what happened in Venezuela right now. When all these, a lot of people for the progressive movement and progressive media going over there, they go to a tour to this the fancy supermarket. Yeah, so the price. What is the people that can buy that? People the rich, that always rich in Venezuela, because the people that do business with the government, because it's the only way to survive Venezuela. Do business with the government, and you will have always money. So that's what happened right now in Venezuela.
Thank you, Manuel. Gabi and Fa, I see you nodding your heads a lot. Does that sound right? Does it echo what you're hearing from your friends and family back home?
Absolutely. And I would add even that it's getting harder and harder to hide the humanitarian crisis, even though the usurped government disagrees and denies. Like, there's no crisis, because they want to sell this dream of socialism that, again, it's not real socialism, but it's a rhetoric. It's a thing that will get some people, not to mess with us. It'll keep them distanced. It's getting harder and harder to see. If you saw a video, I think it was like 2 days ago, Maduro is again on national TV, mandatory national TV, by the way, and he's giving a message, he's delivering a message, and the electricity goes off, and the camera, so people start filming with their phones. It's like, if they don't have electricity, if the palace of government doesn't have electricity, what's like for the rest of the country? My mom, I have my mom there. Electricity comes and goes. I haven't been able to talk to her for like 2 weeks because she hadn't had electricity for like 2 weeks. My brother's a doctor as well, and it's like people are dying of completely preventable diseases, of, oh, I cut myself with like a piece, and there's not a vaccine, there's not alcohol, there's not even water for the people who are the patients. And then I'm worried about the doctors, like my brother and so many others. One of my brother's colleagues, he has a disease and nobody knows what it is. And his hospital where he works can't take care of him because they don't have machines, they don't have MRIs, everything has been fused down because electricity goes on and off. Water is, I was like, I haven't taken a shower in a week. Like, how do you tell a doctor who has to deal with sick people all day and wounds, not just sick from inside, but like they come completely shattered because crime is also insane. So you're dealing with all that and you cannot even wash your hands after. I'm really worried about everybody who works in the health system in the country.
Yes.
Yeah, and so like, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Like, was in the news, like Doctors Without Borders offer like 3 or 5 containers of help. They send it, and the doctor of the Hospital Universitario that was controlled by the government saying, no, we don't need that. That's we don't need that. And people dying like for basic stuff. So that is like a political view. But it's like, even like, what happened with Venezuela? The first time the humanitarian crisis appears was in '99 when Gabi said the tragedia de Vargas. Like it's like 30,000 people died. The entire city almost vanished. And some countries offer, okay, the U.S. offered like Marine Corps. Other countries, Canada, say, well, we can send troops to help. No, we're enough. We don't need help. And they take like 10, 15 years, and you go over there and you still see that big rocks on the way. There's still the crisis over there. So it's like a fake pride.
Mm.
Like it's like son descarados. It's the word. Like,
They're cruel.
why don't you accept the help?
So, and I know there's the legal answer for this, and then there's the ethical, how do we respond to people in need and in crisis? But I think one of the questions people have is, are Venezuelans refugees? If they are refugees, how is the world responding? How should the world be responding? And what does that mean for the U.S. in particular? And I know, Fa, you had, before the conversation started, you had responded with, absolutely, Venezuelans are refugees. Would you speak to that for us?
Yes, so a refugee, by definition, yes, Venezuelans are refugees, but also by recognition. The UN, I think it was almost 2 or 3 years ago, the UN recognized Venezuelans as a refugee type, a typified person. But when they leave their country, because of the situation and the humanitarian and economic crisis, they qualify for refugee or asylum around the world. So different countries have different strategies. It's tough. It's been tougher for Colombia because we're so close, and the majority of almost 5 million Venezuelans who live abroad have, or not just who live abroad, that have left in the last 20 years, have migrated to Colombia. Almost 2 or 3 million are in Colombia alone. Peru, Bolivia. Some countries like Colombia have been more open than others, and it's difficult because most, like some Latin American countries, maybe not Brazil so much, they're small and they don't have the capacity to take care of their own people. The same thing that happened in Europe. Oh, well, we don't have the capacity to take care of our own, and now we have to take 1 million Syrians. But there is an ethical commitment, but also it's a responsibility. If you want to be recognized in the international community as a democratic country, you have to help. Like that's the norm. And for the US, for years, there's been attempts, especially from Florida, because so many Venezuelans arrive in Florida. There's been so many attempts of creating a temporary refugee position, not like a citizenship pathway, but like in the meantime, can we have them here and give them work permits? Because that's the other thing. It's not like, oh, we're going to have to take care of you. But Venezuelans, and this goes to like all migrants, to all refugees from every nationality who come to a country and they don't have the right to work, to provide for themselves. Not only they're hurting themselves, but they're hurting the country. By you not allowing immigrants to work, to provide for your country, you're just hurting yourself.
Thank you.
Actually, legally, so I speak right now for Amnesty International. Amnesty International believes the definition of refugee should apply to a Venezuelan because they are fleeing for the humanitarian crisis. They are fleeing for political persecution, a lot of stuff happening. So there are different instruments, like the 1984 Cartagena Declaration is a regional instrument that acknowledged the concept of the refugee. There was the status refugee of the 1967 that included provisions that consider refugee people like they'll flee the country because their life, security, or freedom are threatened by the violence, foreign aggression, internal conflict, mass violation of human rights, or circumstances that disrupt the public order that's happening right now in Venezuela. So that's why, and actually the Commission of Human Rights or United Nations have a resolution, there's like 218 calling, it's because it's forced immigration of Venezuela. People is not living because, oh, I don't like it. They force people leave practically. 2016 or 17 was something happening because Colombians that used to live in Venezuela started being harassed by Venezuelan government officials, and they demolished houses in all these neighborhoods. There was most Colombian people. They call them traitors because they don't went to vote the elections. So it was like 3,000 people that fled the country again back to Colombia. And right now, but people living in camps, and the UN is working on that. A lot of organizations, the people is not living because pleasure. I think like the call to the different countries in the region is like, give the opportunity to this Venezuelan according to the laws. They they have the right to apply for asylum or for as a refugee and to take care, because that's part of the international law and that's part of the running a community, you know. And like, actually, the U.S. is taking Venezuela right now is the first or second country for more applicants for like 2 years in a row. Yeah, people is going to the Mexican border because actually Amnesty went to Tijuana a couple of weeks ago and interviewed a lot of people, and they take some picture about, it's like a informal list in the Mexico side of the border that people applying for asylum, waiting list. And when I saw that picture of the list, like for 50 people who was on the list, 25 were Venezuelan. I was like, wow. So people is flee the country, driving my car, bus, hitchhiking, and go to the Mexican border with the US and apply for asylum with there because they don't feel safe.
Right.
Where they can apply? In Nicaragua, in Mexico right now, we have histories that you saw on social media, on Facebook, the people that arrived in Mexico, and actually was before AMLO, like was Peña Nieto, it's happening again with AMLO. They go to arrive in the airport and say, why are you coming here? Oh, I had come here business, family. No, you come here to migrate, go back to Venezuela. They deport you. So that's the way to pay about the monetary crisis. This is I don't know what word we can say without saying, but it's awful to trade people suffering that way.
Thank you, Manuel. Gabi, can you speak to this question of, regardless of the relationship between the U.S. government and Venezuelan government, how the people of the U.S. can respond, and as a part of that response, who they should be listening to, reading, the best way to stay informed. Because I think one of the critiques that we're hearing is like, oh, you're getting it all through an American lens. You're getting it all through, and depending on who you're talking to, the American lens is very conservative or the American lens is very liberal. But either way, the critique is you're getting it through an American lens. So one, how do we stay informed? Who can we turn to? And what, if anything, can the US people be doing to respond, regardless of the relationship between governments?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, the way that I approach things, and I think it's been really helpful for me in understanding other countries' situations. So I work in a human rights organization for a couple of years, helping immigrants submit applications and all that kind of stuff. And for me, I think human rights shouldn't be our north. It should be the point at the center of the compass from which everything radiates. So think about, what is the state of human rights in the place that you are trying to learn about? What has that been like over time? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? What does that tell you when nobody has access to water, basic medicine, let alone freedom of speech, you know? So I think for me, has always been a helpful lens. And of course, the things are very complicated, right? And tie into a lot of things. We're trying to understand what is the state of human rights in this place. And then I think the basics of allyship come into place. People in the US, especially like progressive people, are all talking about, well, allyship, being an ally, 101, what's the basics? And I think the basic is like, take a seat and listen to the people that you're trying to be an ally to. So interested in Venezuela, talk to Venezuelans, hear what they have to say. Everyone has a story. Everyone has suffered by this. And I think there are also a lot of Venezuelans that are doing great work to get the word out there of what's happening. So some folks that I know about are Joanna Hausman, who's a Venezuelan comedian, but recently released what I think is a very good video in English that is accessible to other folks. There's Laureano Marquez, who's a Venezuelan journalist and comedian who I think has a very strong ethics of how he looks at stuff. I mean, and of course there are different articles like the Washington Post and whatnot, but I would say, like, talk to a Venezuelan. and think about, why do you care about Venezuela? Like, do you care about it because it's just suddenly in the news and you want to have an opinion? Do you care about Venezuela 4 months ago? Will you care about Venezuela in 4 months? Because the thing is, people's opinions has a really big impact. It has a lot of power. You don't know who you might be talking to, right? And especially people in the US have a lot of privilege and make a lot of noise about what happens and how people interpret things in the world. And so thinking about, well, what is your curiosity? Where is it coming from? Because for us, it's what shapes our life. All of this has been incredibly painful, and I think people are really both tired and excited to share the story and about what's happening. So I would say, yeah, basically talk to a Venezuelan, listen to this video, but there's also like a million different things out there. And also think about, well, if you care about Venezuela and if you care about what's happening, donate to a Venezuelan organization. Donate to an organization that is trying to help with the humanitarian aid. Because I think giving people medicines and basic things to survive shouldn't be a political thing. It should be like, well, you know, this bottle of ibuprofen is labeled with whatever political party name. You know, like, I think this has trespassed that level because people are suffering so much. And so if you really care, donate. Start conversations with people, do the work that allies do.
Yeah, one of the things that we can offer, I will collect the suggested I'll collect the suggested people to be listening to, where to be reading, and who people can support, what organizations, if you want to give and be active. I'll collect those suggestions from our conversation participants today, and I will email them out to everybody who registered for this, and I will post them online when we post the video online, so that people have some place to start. We're getting towards our close. I want to ask 2 questions. The first one I feel like is there's how we're going to answer this quickly. I have no idea, but it was put out there by one of our participants, and so I want to at least ask it. I'm going to ask it to Fa, because you've mentioned this in passing already earlier, and then I have one final question for all of our participants. Fa, is Venezuela socialist? If it's not, what is a better term to use and why?
Venezuela is not socialist, and it is a military dictatorship. It's literally what that is. Why? Because none of the laws have been, or the laws were made in a way that only the government can take advantage of them, and also kind of like bypass them. They have, but the executive, when I say they, I mean the executive has robbed all the powers. So we don't have independencia. We don't have independence of powers. We don't have an executive and a legislative and a tribunal, a judicial power. By the way, we have 5. Chavez created more: the citizen power and then the electoral power. They all become part of the executive. So first, that's not a democracy. It's not socialism. It's a lot of anti-Yankee sentiment, which I think it's very, you know, as I mentioned, it's like, oh, nobody wants to support anything. So it's just a word that they say. It's like 21st century socialism, but nobody knows exactly what that is. It's communism. Not even communism. There's no ethics. There's no value behind it. It's a cacocracia, una cacocracia. It's like the worst of the worst. They're criminals, and they're leading, and they're taking all the power, and they're stealing, and they're narco trafficking as well, which I wanted to mention is why America is an important player. Not so much because, oh, now they're doing the right thing and they need to recognize this president, but there is trafficking of cocaine and a lot of drugs that used to come from Colombia, from the FARC, and now they come from Venezuela to the world. The nephews of the president are right now, they're in prison in New York.
Yes.
Because they try to smuggle almost a ton of cocaine using an official airplane from the Venezuelan government, and they were intercepted in Haiti. So when America is doing something, it's not backing any coup, it's protecting themselves. And also Russia is super inside of Venezuela, and it's also for their protection. So no, it is not socialism. It's craziness, but it is a military dictatorship.
Thank you so much for answering that. So my final question to all three of you is, I'm trying to phrase this, and this might be really hard to answer. How do you feel as a Venezuelan who's not in our birthplace right now, who's having to watch all of this unfold from here in the US? Can you say a couple of sentences to, on a personal level, what that's been like for you? Well, I think one of the ways it was asked of me, and I have been sitting with and really was part of what prompted me doing this recording, is I had someone ask me, do you feel like you're watching something that's happening to home, or do you, and like you could speak to it firsthand, or do you feel like you're watching something like, yes, it's your birthplace, but it's this other place and you're watching it in the same way anyone else in the US would be watching it unfold, where you're just receiving secondhand knowledge. So that's a little wordy in the way I'm saying it, but what does it feel like for you to be watching things unfold? Gabi, can I send it to you first? You look like you're ready to say something.
It doesn't feel like some other place. I think to me, it feels like what's happening there, it's happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I have the immense privilege of sitting in my home in Seattle with food and, with the basics and medicine and all that. But my family is there. My grandparents are there. My little cousins are there. They don't know anything besides this mess because they're like 6 and 4 years old,
Mm-hmm.
We have had family friends who have died because of the disaster that is Venezuelan healthcare right now, and the humanitarian crisis. And so it feels like it's happening to me in a weird way. I've lost nights of sleep. There are these beautiful cartoons. So Venezuelan cartoonists, political cartoonists, are a great resource because I think they capture not so much the political history, like this is the article or this is the statistics, but the feeling, the humanity of it,
Mm-hmm.
Like there was this drawing of a Venezuelan person who was sitting like this. And so like they were like in some snowy place, but their head had the Venezuelan flag. And so I feel like a lot of Venezuelans abroad right now are like that. We're like washing dishes, we're typing away, we're educating, we're cleaning, but our minds and our hearts are in this place. It hurts a lot. I think it's something that has shaped all of our lives, and that people are doing their best to stay connected to home. And I think we've had to break our heart open to make our love more elastic and be able to incorporate all this distance, all this pain. Like I ran into Venezuelans abroad, that people that I don't know from shit. Like just, I heard them talking and they were like, sí, porque la arepa. And I was like, wait. And and we talked, we laughed, we hugged, we cried, because that's part of what being in diaspora is like. And sucks, and we're doing the best that we can to survive.
Thank you. Manuel, how about you?
Yeah, it's really hard. It's really hard. You try when you first move here. I remember, well, this maybe will be a couple of years. This is what's happening. I want to go back, but now you start having a life, a career, but you never disconnect. I have all my family over there. Little by little, cousins and moving and friends are moving here. But with all these guys, I remember, so I am a journalist. In 2014, I was working at a TV station, so I was connected. 2016, 17, I become the Amnesty International Venezuela specialist. So I need to always be aware of all the stuff for Venezuela. All the news and somebody and try to help. Somebody is asking for asylum. And again, the crisis in 2017, and now 2018, and sometimes I want to go, what can I do? So I try to do my best from here, but sometimes like, I think I'm bored or not, like, what happened? Something happened with you? Everybody's about Venezuela. Hey, can you spend us? That I think it was kind of about my coworkers say, hey, so I hear a lot of stuff. What's real happening in Venezuela? So at that time, well, yeah, because when you have some friends like they share news from Telesur or from Russia Today, RT, and they say they have only one side of the stuff. But it's hard to. I think we can never disconnect. I will never like and when you receive calls and texts and sometimes I try to disconnect for maybe 1-2 hours, but it's impossible. More than 2-3 hours disconnect about the stuff in Venezuela. But it's hard. I hope for the sanity of myself or my friends, I think you the same, and the sanity of Venezuelan people. There will be an end of this crisis because people need to have a normal life again.
Thank you. And Fa, how about you?
I mean, both of them, like all of that, plus I didn't realize until very recently how traumatized I was. The first few years I was here, I definitely suffered a lot of guilt, survivor's guilt, both of being able to leave and live here and make money and try like have some sort of stable life, and also very literal survivor's guilt because friends of mine have gotten killed. Not only have died because of diseases and the health system, but I've been protesting and a friend of mine got shot in the head and I survived. And that wasn't just one. So many people that I know and friends and colleagues are in prison, they've disappeared, they've been killed, or they're in exile as me. So for me, it was a very hard transition of like how to be okay. I'm not there, I'm gonna survive, but I felt very guilty that I could be here and then my mom would not have anything to eat, or my brother couldn't take a shower in 2 weeks. And eventually I'm working that out. I'm very traumatized. I have moments where I feel like I'm there. I don't know where I am, and I'm walking and I see all these people and they start speaking English and I see them with coats. I'm like, why are they wearing coats? Like in my head, I'm in Venezuela. Nobody wears coats. It's summer all year long. But it's been an accidental opportunity to educate people about my country, about my culture, not just about what's happening that's bad, which I need to tell because nobody knows. And not because the media is westernized, but even the Venezuelan media is completely officialized, it's completely dictatorialized. Yeah. There is not one single TV, newspaper station, radio station that is independent. So all my news, I know you were asking, who do you follow? Who do you read? I'm like, honestly, it's Instagram. Like my mom, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and WhatsApp groups. WhatsApp has saved millions of Venezuelans in and abroad. I follow Humberto Prado from the National Observatory of Prisons, Laureano Marquez, Cesar Miguel Rondon, huge journalists that are intellectuals as well. So they're not going to talk about ideology, they're going to talk about what's happening and resting on legal grounds. And I just have to say that in Venezuela, but all around the world, when crimes against humanity are being are being done, when there is crimes against humanity, there must be an international response. Otherwise, you're not part of the community. Like, that's it. It's not like you should do it because it makes you feel good. Like, no, you should do it because that's what the law is. Even if that's how you want to think about it, like, it is a crime against humanity. And remember that they do not have a limit. Crimes that this will happen here. And if it doesn't get fixed today, if it's not in 10, 20, 50 years, how many years did it take until the Nuremberg juries, the judgment, this eventually will happen, but it does feel I do feel a little bit of impotence knowing that I went to law school because I wanted to fix it and I got pushed out because I wasn't killed. So one day we'll go back and rebuild it. 1 out of 7 Venezuelans have left the country. 1 out of 7. It's over 10% of in a population of 30 million. It's the biggest exodus that Venezuela has had and the biggest that we've seen in a long time in America. We're like up par with Syria and nobody's talking about it. It is a humanitarian, it's a refugee crisis.
Thank you. And I'll just add for a personal note, and I know I haven't shared very much during this conversation, but my answer to that question was, it's hard because of the four of us, I've been here in the US the longest, and in terms of time and distance, I'm the furthest removed from our birth country, and yet watching all of this unfold, I think you carry a knowledge of your people and your birthplace in your bones, in your spirit. And so it has been heartbreaking to watch this all unfold. And so with that, I want to acknowledge again what it took for the three of you to join us, to share all of this information, particularly with this last question, to share what it's been meaning for yourself and your spirit. So to Gabi, to Fa, to Manuel, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. To those that are listening right now, to those that are gonna watch this later, we'll post the resources, we'll post the opportunities and ways in which you can engage this conversation. But I just thank you for taking a moment to listen to the people of Venezuela, to listen to Venezuelanos rather than talk about us and over us. And so just thank you to our participants and to our speakers this evening. And with that, we're done. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for organizing this too.
What's that?
Thank you so much for organizing this and us coming together.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.